Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you part 1 in a 5-part adaptation of The Crooked Man, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This gripping story of murder and revenge begins when Sherlock Holmes makes a surprise visit to the house of his friend, Dr. Watson, and begins to tell him about the bloody and puzzling case on which he has found himself engaged. One summer night, a few months after my marriage, I was seated by my own hearth, smoking a last pipe and nodding over a novel, for my day's work had been an exhausting one. My wife had already gone upstairs, and the sound of the locking of the hall door some time before told me that the servants had also retired. I had risen from my seat and was knocking out the ashes of my pipe when I suddenly heard the clang of the bell. I looked at the clock. It was 11:45. This could not be a visitor at so late an hour. A patient, evidently, and possibly an all-night sitting. With a wry face, I went out into the hall and opened the door. To my astonishment, it was Sherlock Holmes who stood upon my step.
Ah, Watson, I hoped I might not be too late to catch you.
My dear fellow, please come in.
You look surprised, and no wonder. Relieved, too, I fancy. You still smoke the Arcadia mixture of your bachelor days, then. There's no mistaking that fluffy ash upon your coat. It's easy to tell that you've been accustomed to wear a uniform, Watson. You'll never pass as a purebred civilian as long as you keep that habit of carrying your handkerchief in your sleeve. Could you put me up tonight?
Oh, with pleasure.
You told me that you had bachelor quarters for one, and I see that you have no gentleman visitor at present. Your hat stand proclaims as much.
I shall be delighted if you will stay.
Thank you. I'll fill the vacant peg, then. Sorry to see that you've had the British workman in the house. He's a token of evil. Not the drains, I hope.
No, the gas.
Ah, he's left 2 nail marks from his boot upon your linoleum just where the light strikes it. No, thank you, I've had some supper at Waterloo, but I'll smoke a pipe with you with pleasure.
I handed him my pouch, and he seated himself opposite to me and smoked for some time in silence. I was well aware that nothing but business of importance would have brought him to me at such an hour, so I waited patiently until he should come around to it.
I see that you are professionally rather busy just now.
Yes, I've had a busy day. It may seem very foolish in your eyes, but really, I don't know how you deduced it.
I have the advantage of knowing your habits, my dear Watson. When your round is a short one, you walk, and when it is a long one, you use a hansom. As I perceive that your boots, although used, are by no means dirty, I cannot doubt that you are at present busy enough to justify the hansom.
Excellent.
Elementary. It is one of those instances where the reasoner can produce an effect which seems remarkable to his neighbour because the latter has missed the one little point which is the basis of the deduction. But that's neither here nor there. At present I hold in my hand several threads of one of the strangest cases which have ever perplexed a man's brain, and yet I lack the 1 or 2 which are needful to complete my theory. But I'll have them, Watson. I'll have them.
His eyes kindled, and a slight flush sprang into his thin cheeks. For an instant only. When I glanced again, his face had resumed that expressionless composure which had made so many regard him as a machine rather than a man.
The problem presents features of interest, I may say even exceptional features of interest. I have already looked into the matter and have come, as I think, within sight of my solution. If you could accompany me in that last step, you might be of considerable service to me.
I should be delighted.
Could you go as far as Aldershot tomorrow?
I have no doubt Jackson would take over my practice.
Very good. I want to start by the 11:10 from Waterloo.
That would give me time.
Then, if you are not too sleepy, I will give you a sketch of what has happened and what remains to be done.
I was sleepy before you came. I am quite wakeful now.
I will compress the story as far as may be done without omitting anything vital to the case. It is conceivable that you may even have read some account of the matter. It is the supposed murder of Colonel Barclay of the Royal Mallows at Aldershot, which I am investigating.
I have heard nothing of it.
It has not excited much attention yet, except locally. The facts are only 2 days old. Briefly, they are these.
The extraordinary narrative, as Holmes told it to me, ran like this. The Royal Mallows are one of the famous Irish regiments in the British Army. They did wonders both in the Crimean War and in the Indian Mutiny of 1857, and have since that time distinguished themselves upon every possible occasion. The regiment had been commanded up until the previous Monday night by James Barclay, a gallant veteran who started as a full private, was promoted to commissioned rank for his bravery at the time of the Indian Mutiny, and so lived to command the regiment in which he had once carried a musket. Colonel Barclay had married at the time when he was a sergeant, and his wife, whose maiden name was Miss Nancy Devoy, was the daughter of a former color sergeant in the same corps. There was, therefore, as can be imagined, some little social friction when the young couple, for they were still young, found themselves in their new surroundings. They appear, however, to have quickly adapted themselves, and Mrs. Barclay had always been as popular with the ladies of the regiment as her husband was with his brother officers. It may be added that she was a woman of great beauty, and that, even now, when she had been married for upwards of 30 years, she was still of a striking and queenly appearance. Colonel Barclay's family life appears to have been a uniformly happy one. Major Murphy, the man to whom Holmes owed most of his facts, assured him that he had never heard of any misunderstanding between the pair. On the whole, he thought that Barclay's devotion to his wife was greater than his wife's to Barclay. Barclay was acutely uneasy if he was away from her for a single day. She, on the other hand, though devoted and faithful, was less obtrusively affectionate. But they were regarded in the regiment as the very model of a middle-aged married couple. There was absolutely nothing in their mutual relationship to prepare people for the tragedy which was to follow. Colonel Barclay himself seems to have had some singular traits in his character. He was a dashing, jovial old soldier in his usual mood, but there were occasions on which he seemed to show himself capable of considerable violence and vindictiveness. This side of his nature, however, appears never to have been turned toward his wife. Another fact, which had struck Major Murphy and 3 out of 5 of the other officers with whom Holmes had conversed, was the odd sort of depression which came upon him at times. As Major Murphy expressed it, the smile had often been struck from his mouth, as if by some invisible hand, even as he enjoyed the gaieties and chaff of the mess table. For days on end, when the mood was on him, Colonel Barclay would sink into the deepest gloom. This and a certain tinge of superstition were the only unusual traits in his character which his brother officers had observed. The latter peculiarity took the form of a dislike to being left alone, especially after dark. This childlike feature in a man who was otherwise conspicuously manly had often given rise to comment and conjecture among the ranks. The 1st Battalion of the Royal Mallows, which is the old 117th, had been stationed at Aldershot for some years. The married officers lived out of barracks, and the colonel, during all that time, occupied a villa called Lachine, about half a mile from the North Camp. The house stands on its own grounds, but the west side of it is not more than 30 yards from the high road. A coachman and 2 maids form the staff of servants. These, with their master and mistress, were the sole occupants of Lachine, for the Barclays had no children, nor was it usual for them to have resident visitors. At this point in his narrative, Holmes paused and sighed dramatically.
And now, my dear fellow, I come to the terrible events which occurred at Lachine between 9 and 10 last Monday evening.
What could have occurred at the barracks of the Royal Mallows in Aldershot to result in the apparent murder of the decorated officer Colonel Barclay? How might the wife of the colonel, the commanding officer of the Royal Mallows, have been involved in his untimely death? Find out tomorrow evening as Holmes continues to recount the extraordinary story of his ongoing investigation to his dear friend and chronicler Dr. Watson, who is listening with rapt attention to the surprising details. Join us tomorrow for part 2 in our adaptation of The Crooked Man here on BeFM Drama.